Hello, history scholars. Mrs. Olson here. Today's lesson is titled The Civil War Begins. This is when America fights America. It is North versus the South. Now, before we get into the lesson, let's make sure that you are prepared to learn and record information, i.e., take notes. So make sure that you have a piece of paper out, a writing utensil in hand, or if you want to record notes by typing, have a word processing document open so that you can record your information by typing notes onto, say, a Word document or into a Google document, something like that. All right, here we go. Let's begin with our learning target. Learning target reads that you will be able to understand the advantages and disadvantages that each side had at the beginning of the Civil War. So you are going to learn what the North and the South had as far as positives and negatives, the advantages and disadvantages that they had to use against each other. Okay, here we go with our first slide. So the word that I want to start out with today is secession. So if you can say it with me, try to say it out loud, secession. Now, the word secession in the context of the Civil War is going to refer to the South leaving the North, breaking away from the North. So I've been kind of playing with my cursor with the outline of these southern states. It's the darker green color on this map. These are the southern states. You can see that they're labeled slave states on this map. And the north is kind of this light red color, you might even call it pink, and it is labeled free states, okay? So think of this area as the north and this area as the south. So the south is going to try to break away from the north. All right, here we go with our first note. It reads that many Southerners viewed Lincoln's election as a threat to their society. So let's talk more about that. Lincoln has these ideas that are considered somewhat progressive. They're new. They go against the way that the people in the South think. And they think with him being elected president that they will not be able to maintain their way of life. Okay? Now, the states that are going to break away from the North are, here's the list: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Now, as you guys are writing these down, it is very okay to pause on the video so that you can record all of the information that you are supposed to be remembering. And because they're your notes, you can also abbreviate as you see fit. So for example, instead of writing out the whole word South Carolina, you might just abbreviate it as a capital S and a capital C, okay? Same thing with Mississippi, it would be MS, or maybe you just write MISS and you know that that is going to, that it means in your notes, Mississippi, okay? All right, the last note on this page reads that we're talking about the South, they viewed secession as a necessary course of action to uphold people's rights. Okay, we've got to break this down a little bit. So they is the South. Secession is them breaking away, so they don't want to have any part to do with the United States of America anymore. They want to be their own country, okay? And they believe it's necessary to break away from the North or the rest of America so they can uphold, they can maintain, they can keep their the way that they live, the way that they think, and what they believe are their rights. So let's get into those rights just a little bit. Those rights, a lot of it have to do with property, okay? Now, the property specifically that we're talking about are people. They're human beings, they're slaves. Slaves were seen as property. So these wealthy white landowners, these plantation owners, who had slaves, they made a huge profit. That means that they made money off of unpaid slave labor, okay? And they believe that it is their right, sorry, that keeps coming up. They believe that it is their right to own these people, these slaves that they've had on their land, their plantations, some of them for hundreds of years. Okay, so the next slide, the title of that slide is Founding the Confederacy. Okay, in February of 1861, the seceded states, and now we have a list of those states that broke away, they declared themselves to be a new nation. So they called themselves the Confederate States of America or the Confederacy. So anytime we study the Civil War, you're going to hear Confederate or Confederacy, and that's just talking about the group of southern states that broke away from the North. Okay? The very first Confederate president, his name was Jefferson Davis, and I've got a picture of him here so that you can see what he looked like and place a face with the name. So I want to share a line with you from Davis's inaugural address. An inaugural address is the first speech or statement that the president gives after they are elected. Okay, so I want you to listen for important points in here. One of the lines that he said, "The time for compromise has now passed, and the South is determined to maintain her position and make all who oppose her smell Southern powder and feel Southern steel." Okay, so that line in his inaugural speech, it's supposed to give you an idea of the way that he thought about fighting against the North and people that did not believe in what they believed in. All right, now let's talk about President Lincoln, okay? President Lincoln, in his inaugural address, he repeated his commitment not to interfere with slavery where it existed. So this is one thing that I want my students to understand, is that President Lincoln, while he was not an advocate for slavery, he wanted to keep the Union together. He wanted to keep the United States together. So he was going to allow slavery to exist in the South. So that's his commitment, not to interfere where slavery already existed. Pretty interesting, right? So there's President Lincoln. I'm going to guess that most of you guys have probably seen a photograph of him before. Okay. And I want you to stick with me for just a minute. This is what President Lincoln said in part of his inaugural address. It reads, "In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war." So it hasn't broke out yet. He's saying that it can. "The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it." Okay, I am loth to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union when, again touched as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. So I ask you, do you think that President Lincoln really wanted to go to war? Did he want the Civil War to happen? If you judge by his words here in his inaugural address, he's saying that the South and the North, they're friends. They may not agree on some things and the relationship is strained, but they are bonded by affection of being Americans. Okay, so this is the first page of that inaugural address. You can see that it says the title, Inaugural Address, President of the U.S., 4th of March, 1861. So I think it's always kind of neat and important to be able to see, if not read the entire thing, but to be able to see what a primary document looks like. All right, everyone, I am going to close this video lesson right here as part one, okay? So there's more to this video lesson, but this is part one. This is where you can stop it, take a break a little bit, maybe rewind, get a couple of other notes perhaps, but we're gonna be ready for part two here pretty soon.